Here today with Bruce Daisley. Bruce, how are you, sir?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for chatting to me as well. I really appreciate it.
No worries at all. Thanks so much. I know you just jumped out of the shower, so I do appreciate it. Tell me, let me start. Why does work need to be fixed?
I think we've in an extraordinary moment. You know, even 2 years ago, we would have probably reflected that work was overwhelming, exhausting, it was overscheduled. And we've just had 2 years where I think we've learned a great deal about how work could be different. We've learned that we can do our jobs untethered from our offices and desks. But to a large extent, a lot of us are still suffering from the same issues where we are overscheduled, our diaries are overfull. There's a burnout epidemic reflecting the fact that many of us just feel unable to escape the insistent demands of electronic communication. So I think, you know, these big challenges for all of us. We've learned far more how we can do our job in a different way. We've just found ourselves in a situation where the burdens of work are probably overwhelming the benefits of the way we're working.
And where do you think the onus lies to move it forward? Is it on the employer or the employee to push everything on? Because one of the challenges I've been seeing, and I feel very much, is certainly in the media, it's a very like linear approach, it's either one way or another, kind of, and it seems to be somewhere in the middle. So I wondered on your take on the whole thing.
Most definitely, it's going to be a point of differentiation. I think, you know, one of the things that we know is that the firms who get this right will be the ones that grow the most in the next 5-10 years. So the ones who seize the opportunity presented here are the ones who probably will be able to achieve greater productivity. They'll be able to achieve greater cut through in competitive marketplaces. They'll produce better and more innovative ideas, or they'll execute those ideas more effectively. So all of those things are going to be points of differentiation. You know, I've probably consulted with 50, 60 firms in the last 12 months, and a lot of them have got similar instincts that you might expect. A lot of them are led by bosses who know that working in the office 5 days a week worked. They delivered good growth from it, and they want to get back to that. And one of the challenges, of course, is that, you know, they are looking at the heuristics, the rules, the things that might have succeeded before, and they are not necessarily perceiving that the market has changed, that the jobs market has changed, the expectations of employees has changed. So I think, you know, we won't necessarily think that this firm or this firm has got better policies, but what we might start seeing is that the firms who are more nimble or can hire better people because they've got more flexible rules will find that they achieve better growth. So I think it'll be a quiet differentiator over time.
So let me ask, kind of, obviously you were the most senior leader of Twitter outside of the US. So you were working with remote working environment anyway. Building a culture, which kind of is something that leadership is very much looking into, and with this new hybrid working, whatever we want to call it, how do you do that? How do you get that culture instilled in people who are working via Zoom or whatever virtual environment you're using?
I think the real critical thing is that even the firms who are fully remote often hesitate from describing themselves as remote only. They describe themselves as remote first or distributed first, because they recognize that those moments where we are together are such an important, energizing, catalyzing moment of connection. And I think it's being more intentional about that. So knowing that, you know, every organized religion has celebrated the benefit of people being together, of people being part of a congregation. And so knowing that being together is an important part of your culture, but you're going to use it in a more intentional way. So we're not going to be together 5 days a week, but every Wednesday, this team is gathering, and we're going to make sure that there's fewer Zoom calls. There's going to be fewer scheduled meetings when we're together on Wednesday, or whatever it is. It's being more intentional about how we use our time. I worked with a really big retailer last year, and they'd gone back to the office. They were back to the office 2 or 3 days a week. And one of the senior leaders said to me, he said, it's a nightmare. I'm going into the office. I'm sitting in meeting rooms all day doing video calls with people at home. He said, I'm not even, the thing we've nostalgically dreamed about for the last 2 years is being around colleagues, about sort of these water cooler moments, these serendipitous moments of connection. And he said, I've not even achieved any of those because I've just been sitting on back-to-back video calls. And so that's what I mean by intentional. That's saying, okay, the days I'm in the office, I'm going to make sure I meet people face to face. The days I'm in the office, I'm not going to do my video calls. So it requires a break from what we've done in the past. Our diary has sort of been self-populating with meetings have just dropped in. We've often not really taken a look at what next Wednesday looks like, or the Thursday the week after looks like. But increasingly now, we're going to need a degree of curation, a degree of planning, a degree of creation. And I think that's why it's such a fundamental moment in leadership. It's such a fundamental moment in management. The differentiator for the next period of business is going to be the cultures that create these curated moments of togetherness, that create these moments where we're building a difference into our Mondays look different to our Thursdays in a really intentional way, I think.
Fascinating. I love that. Let me ask, you've got a new book coming out, How We Think About Resilience Incorrectly. Tell me, what should we be doing instead? Where are we going wrong?
Yeah, I think the critical thing when we think about resilience, we often either imagine it's this remarkable trait that some individuals have and some individuals don't have. So, we might look at we might look at, we love resilient stories. So the resilient stories permeate all of our news. They permeate the movies we watch. They're the sports stories we celebrate. When people come back and they triumph over adversity, we look at that and we say, wow, they were incredibly resilient. And what we miss from those stories is that resilience is typically a team sport, not an individual sport. It's typically something that we access collectively rather than individually. And so one of the things that you discover when you delve into the research of this is that groups generally show an incredible amount of resilience, or if an individual manifests resilience, it's generally because they feel supported by the people around them. They feel like they've got a strong network. It's no surprise that when we see sports people on the podium giving a celebration speech, they often thank their team, because far more than we'll ever realize, that team got them there. The trainers, the coaches, the physios was a really important component of their success. So one of the mistakes we make, therefore, is that we see someone who's maybe struggling, or see someone who's failing, and we think, well, you need to be more resilient. And the question we should be saying is, well, how can we enable that person to be more resilient? How can we create the structures that builds resilience for that person? So I think, understanding that resilience is accessed collectively is a really important understanding. And, the book is a real exploration of themes of identity, of themes of community, the components of how we can feel more collectively and individually strong.
So can I ask, just kind of as a final question, with the last 2 years of the pandemic, or 2.5 years of the pandemic, as a broad brush, do you think we as a society have become more resilient, or as people have gone through it themselves in their own homes and lockdown and everything like that, actually we'll be more dependent on ourselves, and therefore, to some extent, in terms of what you've just said, become less resilient?
I think it's mixed, because the people who've found that this moment has brought them close to their family, they've got to know the names of the people they share a house with. They've found themselves on a WhatsApp group with neighbors in their street. They've found that actually they've organized more things with friends outdoors. Those people will often find that they've got greater strength. The people who have found themselves increasingly isolated, have maybe sort of, maybe they share a house with people, but they don't necessarily get on with them. And that could be in any sort of domestic or friendship relationship. But those people generally have found it harder. There was some really fascinating research come out of the US that was done in the first 3 or 4 months of the pandemic, looking at teenagers. Now, teenagers are often the group that we look at and we wonder if they're less resilient than their precursors, their forebears were stronger than they were. And what you found was in the first 3-4 months of lockdown, when teenagers reported their relationships with their family had got better, they were showing greater signs of resilience. They were showing greater signs of strength. And it really demonstrates resilience is about relationships, and resilience is about the connection to others. And so these teenagers whose relationships with their family had improved, they were having a family meal every day. Those ones showed greater resilience. The ones who weren't having family meals together, and then they had the connection of school taken from them as well, they were showing less resilience. And I think there's a hint in that sort of really highly examined group of teenagers, there's a hint in that of where resilience lies.
Bruce Daisley, thank you so much for your time today. As always, been a pleasure speaking to you, and look forward to catching up soon.
Great to chat. Thank you so much.